Okay. So, lecture results are already starting to stream in, and you guys came anyway. It's good. Huh? Yeah, well, they've been repeating the same thing all day. What'd you say? Yeah. All right. Hi, everybody. I hope that the people had a good week. Maybe you had a chance to. Is Larry here, Travis? No. Okay, I'm gonna embarrass him when he's not here. He asked a good question. Anyway, I hope you had a chance to maybe read the book and think about stuff and maybe ask some questions. I know that I spent a lot of time thinking about what we're going to do today, kind of based on our discussions from last week. I want to focus on chapters 3 and 4. But before we do that, sort of as by way of review, two things. I got a nice email from a member of the class who writes nice emails from time to time, and anybody who wants to copy them and write nice emails, I'd like to repeat them. He said, I think there's a fundamental flaw in the logic of Kohelet chapter 1. Kohelet doesn't recognize that man is the only species on earth that can store information outside of its own brain. Thus, man is in a position to accumulate knowledge, and by passing it from generation to generation, enable future generations to benefit.
Oh, the writer just walked in.
If you were here, I would have asked permission, but since you weren't. Is it okay to continue? While the earth may seem to remain essentially the same within a human lifetime, we know that it does change over longer periods because of this accumulated knowledge. Yes, one generation goes and another comes, but each generation of man has the benefit of the recorded experiences of the preceding generations upon which to build. Kohelet himself must have recognized this fact and then denied it. Otherwise, why was he writing his wisdom? Who did he expect to read this wisdom? He must have written this for the benefit of future generations. So, yes, but I think that we have to remember that chapter 1 of Kohelet was not stating sort of Kohelet's way of seeing the world. It was him stating the problem with the world. And if you want to imagine it that way, imagine him as a teacher saying, you think this is the way the world works, nothing matters, the world always stays the same, the water flows in, and the ocean never rises. And then you have two choices in which to answer. One is to respond essentially as Larry did, and to say, well, no, you're wrong, the world does change, so stop thinking that the world doesn't change, it does. Kohelet's answer is different. Kohelet's answer is saying, okay, this may be the way that you see the world, that it's depressing, things don't seem to matter, my life doesn't seem to matter, so make sure that you take some time to enjoy it while you can. Make sure that you appreciate, right, that alongside all the bad things that happen in the world, there are beautiful flowers, there are beautiful trees. If you don't take some time to notice, those things, you might have a different perspective. So anyway, we'll see if we like his answers as we go. Okay. So, review just from last time. He had, right, the whole thing, hard work seems pointless. His biggest problem was that you might make a lot of money, and then you don't know who's going to inherit it from you, right? And that might be a waste. Wisdom is better than wealth. The other piece, when he says, nothing changes, we're all the same, that's also code for fundamentally, we are all the same in the sense that we all die. So it doesn't matter how much wisdom you accumulate, your end will be that you will die. So turn to, we're going to start in chapter 2, verse 24. And I can invite somebody to read, just kind of finish off the chapter here, because he begins to show you his kind of world here. Go ahead, Judy.
There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink and make his soul enjoy pleasure for his labor. This also I saw, that is from the hand of God. For who will eat, or who will enjoy, if not I? For to the man that is good in his sight, he giveth wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth the task to gather and to heap up, that he may leave to him that is good in the sight of God.
Okay. So if you followed it in the JPS, it might have made a little bit more sense.
Yeah, right.
So he says, right, so on one sense, this is probably still restating the problem, right? I think that there's nothing to do in the world but just enjoy myself, become an Epicurean, right? Right, if, right, so two pieces of this. Number one, there's a technical term here. The word is amalo. He should enjoy his work. He should, with the word that is translated here as with his means, right, with his means. There are two kinds of work, right? If you want to do something, you want to make something, you want to cook for the sake of eating, work for the sake of putting bread on the table, that's called oseh. It's just doing. Amal is to labor, to toil. Here it's translated as his means, but the point is, it's a good thing to work, but if you overwork, that's the amal, you're going to forget to enjoy the world, right? That's what we tell people all the time. Make sure you come home and that's why we have Shabbat, right? Make sure that you appreciate things. Then you will enjoy your life. And he adds, and that's a new piece, ki miyad ha'elohim. This comes from God. This is the first mention of God in the book. And I think that we have to ask ourselves, what is it that he means by God? And we'll try to see how that comes through. The second verse 26, right? The difference between a wise person and a fool is that the wise person takes the time to enjoy life. A fool thinks that his job is just to work and work and work, and then the next day you get up and you work and work and work. A wise person takes the time to enjoy it. There's a piece of God is the good things that happen in the world. Again, it's that you walk home from a bad day in the office and all the things that go wrong. The godliness is the flowers and the trees that are all around you, the chance to enjoy that. There is one other interesting piece, and then we'll get on to chapter 3, which is what we want to spend most of the day on. I told you last week that the rabbis, part of the reason they were able to accept Kohelet as a biblical book is that they interpreted it the way they wanted it to read. So they wanted it to tell you that the secret to life is following the Torah, observing the mitzvot. And so on this verse, right, there's nothing worthwhile for a man but to eat and drink and afford himself enjoyment with his means. The Midrash says, every mention of eating and drinking in the scroll refers to Torah and good deeds. Rabbi Yonah said the decisive proof text is, and it will accompany him in the toil during all the days of his life. Ba'amalo in the toil should be understood as if to read Ba'olamo in his world. The days of his life refer to the grave. But is there food and drink in the grave that could accompany a person to the grave? Obviously not. Hence, these things refer to Torah and good deeds. I don't want to parse it out. I don't want to parse it out except for to say that when he says, "Oh, the only thing you should do is eat, drink, and be merry," the rabbis read, "Oh, the only thing you should do is follow the Torah and do good deeds." So now he says what he wants them to. Okay, chapter 3 is probably the most familiar to anybody, and so I just want to set it up. Part of what Kohelet is doing is dealing with theodicy. Why do bad things happen to good people? I've said this many times to people, and I'm going to say it again tomorrow if anyone is taking my webinar. But what is theodicy? What is the problem with why bad things happen to good people? There are 3 statements. 1, God is good and just. 2, God is all powerful. 3, there is evil in the world. One of these statements cannot be true. And the question of why do bad things happen to good people is meditating on this. And the answer is, very quickly, right? There are those who believe there really isn't, or not that there isn't evil in the world, but we don't experience evil. You think what's happening might be evil, but really God has a larger plan. You don't really understand, something like that, right? Or who says that God is all powerful? Maybe evil happens because God can't control everything. And then there's always the leftover one of maybe bad things happen because who said God's such a good God? Maybe God does some nasty things. Kohelet looks at the world and says, you're asking the wrong question. Don't ask, why do bad things happen to good people? That question is just going to make you miserable. Instead, you should be saying, how do I deal with a world in which bad things happen to good people? By the way, Harold Kushner came 2,000 years later, but that's essentially what he was saying. Right? It's when bad things happen to good people, how do I deal with it? And that is exactly how he begins chapter 3, because it begins with the words, Lakol Zman, there is a season for everything, right? Why do bad things happen? Because everything happens. Sometimes bad things happen, sometimes good things happen, right? That's a fundamental truth. All right, would someone like to read a little bit? We'll try to read the first 9 verses there. Okay, go ahead.
A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for shunning embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for ripping and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. What value, then, can the man of affairs get from what he earns?
All right, so we'll stop there. Okay, I want to go through some of them, but anybody have any reactions? Let's not all speak up at once.
Well, it's that kind of a statement of equilibrium.
Huh?
It's kind of a statement of balance. Or
Well, yeah, and that's
a
what we had
balance
sort of
the
last
world
week also, the same
or
thing with the
equilibrium.
rivers coming in and the rivers coming out. It's not fatalism. Time to be born and a time to die doesn't mean that it's already determined when you're supposed to die. It says that you die, right? When is a person born? When the body is, when the embryo is ready to be, to come out. I just we'll do some flipping here, because there's some interesting verses, the way that this fits into the rest of the Bible. Job chapter 39. Does anyone have a full Bible here? We got all different editions, so it makes it fun. If you don't have it, don't worry, we'll read it out loud. It's only one verse. I'm in the Adele Berlin Study Bible. Job comes after Proverbs, which comes after Psalms.
1499.
And this Adele Berlin, it's on 1557. Huh?
1719.
Yeah, we got all different. We got all different. Anyway, I don't want to. We're not going to harp on it, so don't worry if you don't have the book.
What do you want on Job?
But what do you say?
What do you want on Job?
Job chapter 39. This is Job speaking to God speaking to Job out of the whirlwind, and essentially Job says, "You can't understand the world. You don't know what you're doing. I'm the one who knows." And the words that he used. Do you know the season when the mountain goats give birth? Can you mark the time when the hinds calve? Can you count the months when they must complete? Do you know the season they give birth? The point is, right, there is a time, when it says there's a time to be born, it's saying, right, people are born when it's the right time, right? Not, that it's fatalistic when a person should get pregnant or something like On the same idea of a time to die, right? The book of Psalms says that a person lives, right, 70 years, and if they're lucky, they live 80 years. And then you know, Rabbi Akiva said, well, so you start with that number of 70 or 80, and then if things go badly, you die early, or if things go later, you go the other way, you live longer. But there is another term in the Bible of dying, right? The way the Bible says someone dies young is that he died before his time, right? Like, for example, in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 17. Right? Don't overdo wickedness, and don't be a fool, or you may die before your time. Right? Lama tamut below itacha. Right? So, again, right? Why do people live? Why do people die? Because the world works kind of the way that it's supposed to. The problem is not that there's evil in the world. The problem is that we spend too much time making ourselves crazy trying to figure it out. Don't overdo all that stuff, you're going to make yourself nuts. But that's that time to be born, time to die. Time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted. When's the time to uproot planted? Harvest. It could be harvest. Could be war also. Again, time for eight laharog, a time for killing, or a time for slaying, a time for healing, right? Tearing down and building up. Again, there are some war pieces. Verse 5, anybody want to try this throwing stones thing? Huh?
Treating the guilty in the marketplace.
Oh, that you're throwing the stones as a capital punishment?
Yes.
Oh, that's a possibility.
There's a note in the Susino that
Yeah.
indicates that one possibility is putting stones, casting stones around a field that you've conquered, a city to make it infertile, and gathering the stones together is cleaning up that field.
Right. Well, exactly. So you gather the stones to be able to plant. You throw the stones to ruin a field. That's a reference. It's 3 Kings 19. Sorry, 2 Kings chapter 3 verse 19. You shall conquer every fortified town and every splendid city. You shall fell every good tree and stop up all the wells of water, and every fertile field you shall ruin with stones. The rabbis got a little more graphic with it, and they said that throwing stones and gathering stones is about sex. That there are certain times of the year, or certain times of the month when you're allowed to have sex, and certain times when you're not. And somehow the sexual act is spreading out your stones. Interesting way. I didn't make this stuff up, guys.
No, but you're repeating it.
It strikes me,
Yeah, Eric.
what strikes me about this, it's such, it's the best known part of the book, as you said, but it's so abruptly, a change of the discussion, and what it's something that is common in reading Tanakh, I think, is you suddenly come to something that it's not clear what it has to do.
It doesn't seem clear how this comes from what came
From what he's been
before it.
discussing in the first 2 sections, and then even continuing at the end of those verses of the time for this and the time for that, he concludes, what value can the man of affairs get from what he earns? And I'm thinking, saying, huh?
So there's a certain amount, yeah, it's a fair point. There is a certain point, I actually wanted to show you something else. There is a certain amount of Ecclesiastes is not put together like a narrative or like a philosophical treatise, and so it doesn't line up. But I think that Marty's point is part of this. We were talking about, right, this theme of equilibrium is in every chapter, and it does go through, and so I think it does, right, stylistically, it's totally different. And there's a little note in my book that says that some manuscripts have it written as a poem and some manuscripts have it written not as a poem. Stylistically, it's kind of different and sticks out, but in terms of the theme, that this is how it will be, it seems to fit.
Isn't that evidence that the book was probably written by multiple people over a span of time, maybe centuries?
Look, I don't know if that's evidence that it is. The assumption always
Because
is.
there's always
My assumption always
a change
is.
of tone, a change of style.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether the
Now
change is that strong here. My sense is that every biblical book is written by multiple authors over time, or not necessarily written. That some of the group think that came into it was actually more of an oral tradition, leading up to it. Whether this fact that these 9 verses or the pieces fit, in different ways, that might be, you could say that, but it's also sort of just the way the narrative is constructed. It's, I'm thinking about different things, but it always goes back to that same theme of, right, the world is as it is, and you can be bothered by it, or you can learn to live in the world as it is. And we don't. By the way, I mean, I've given that sermon about why you should observe Shabbat all the time. Right? So, what is Shabbat? Shabbat is the foretaste of the world as it should be, right? And for that one day, we stop what we're doing and we pretend none of it exists. That's kind of Kohelet right there. Just look at chapter 11 for a second.
One question. Is there any sense that when it's a poem, it's older, or that doesn't necessarily apply?
In Torah, for sure, when it's a poem, it's older.
Yeah.
I quite simply, as a general rule, I'm sure there are multiple authors. I'm sure that's a general principle. I can't really tell you very much about how this particular book is put together. Right, look at verse 3 in chapter 11. If the clouds are filled, they will pour down rain on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, the tree will stay where it falls. If one watches the wind, he will never sow. And if one observes the clouds, he will never reap. Just as you do not know how the life breath passes into the limbs within